Welcome back, honors. All right, so no, that was not a dad. That was like a this, right? I was pointing at things. It wasn't one of these. All right, so now, anyway, so something important to get into, okay? We are now actually starting our newer, I'm recording this and actually doing it. I'm not giving you a retread from quarantine school last year where the microphone wasn't that good sometimes and blah, 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 blah. All right, so, but getting after it, though, something you need to understand is that we are jumping in, springboarding off our political isms, right? We discussed Napoleon's effects in Europe. We talked about the Congress of Vienna. We talked about the Quadruple Alliance, da-da-da-da. Something's going to drive some of y'all nuts. There's going to be an alliance within the alliance. Ooh, all right, but it's going to be okay, right? So the biggest thing we need to analyze starting out the gate is Clemens von Metternich, the conservative superhero. Why is he like this, right? So why would anybody want to go back to absolutism? Why would anybody want to, who's not even a king himself, like he's a prince, okay? He's not even actually a person that's going to benefit necessarily well, actually, he is going to directly benefit from absolutists, but he's not the absolutist. So why is he advocating for them, right? It's very important to understand this stuff, okay? So he was born into the landholding nobility, and remember the old princes from the HRE, okay? So that's why he's called Prince Clemens von Metternich, right? He is one of those old princes that lived inside of the HRE, right? He owned estates, titles, and lands inside of those areas. Those titles are given to you by absolute rulers, okay? So nobles have this idea, and earls and barons, they have all this stuff blessed upon them by absolute leaders and absolute rulers, okay? So Clemens von Metternich grew up going through Austria and going through Vienna and having a brilliant political career using his landholding title and his reputation to actually grow his name. Now, after the Napoleonic invasions, he begins to develop a very Hobbesian view of people in the social contract, right? He believes in the ideas that Thomas Hobbes put forward in the Leviathan. He thinks all of you are disgusting leeches upon society that are just going to kill, murder, and destroy one another because you are selfish, right? And that you should give up your rights to a strong, powerful absolutist, right? So now he is the model for the conservative era. Just like the Marquis de Lafayette is the model for our middle class era, right? So, or our middle class, our classical liberals, okay? And just like Karl Marx is our socialist communist person that we defect to. So is this guy named Robert Owen and a couple other guys, John Stuart Mill, but we don't need to get into them right now. But the big thing though, okay, you have to understand is that Clemens von Metternich absolutely despises one thing in particular, right? So you have to understand conservatives, just like Clemens, are all afraid of what I refer to in Western civilization's history and European history as conservative kryptonite. Now, if you don't know what kryptonite is, let me show you real fast.
Don't touch that. I told you. It's kryptonite, Superman. Little souvenir from the old hometown. I've spared no expense to make you feel right at home.
Yeah, exactly. That's kryptonite, right? So kryptonite is a very, very, very intense thing that is supposed to make even the strongest hero, Superman, very, very weak, right? Well, that's the thing that could destroy conservatives, right? Middle-class people advocate for this. Even socialists began to advocate for this, right? And what is conservative kryptonite? It's two things, okay? It's a constitution and self-determination, okay? Constitutions and self-determination are the things that can destroy conservative thought and theory because it will strip power away from absolute monarchs. Now, you know what a constitution is. Constitutions are the idea that, like, we have a document that gives people rights and limits the power of the monarch and establishes a legislative body like the parliament, right? What you don't know is self-determination, right? So self-determination is a very important one that I will demonstrate with two maps, and I want you to write down in your own words, right? So self-determination is the idea that goes against this, okay? So this is the map post-Congress of Vienna, right? So on this map, look at this map really, really quickly. Really take a hardcore observation of this map, right? We've got Russia, Prussia, Austria, France and Great Britain being the largest powers in Europe. According to this map, that there are only truly like 5 or 6 powerful countries in Europe. Now, for any person that's not a mouth breather, you know that that's not how cultural boundaries in Europe work. There are people that live within the Austrian Empire that don't speak German, right? For example, this area right here is Hungary. Hungary is inhabited by Hungarians, and Hungarians speak Hungarian, right? For example, I refer to my dog as Kicsi Ferfi, which is Hungarian for little gentleman, right? So like now, but the big thing about it you need to understand is that self-determination looks more like this, okay? So on the inside of the Austrian Empire, you had Hungarians, Slovakians, Croatians, Slovenians, Serbians, Bosnians, flipping Romanians over here, and like all these other different groups of people. So self-determination is the idea that all these people, because they share a common culture, and they share a common genius, and they share a common diet, and they share common songs and music, that they all deserve to have countries of their own, right? So that is why we have the modern-day European map the way it is. Cultures self-determined, right? There is a Croatia that is inhabited mostly by Croatians, right? We have Serbia, which is inhabited mostly by Serbians. We have Italy, which is inhabited mostly by Italians. That is self-determination, okay? Self-determination is the second element of that conservative kryptonite, right? Because it will destroy the empires, right? This is where Clemens von Metternich is from. Austria-Hungary, or the Austrian Empire, right? The Austrian Habsburg Empire. This little nugget over here, that's all the Austrians. Everybody else speaks different languages, right? So Clemens von Metternich is terrified of this idea that people could want countries of their own because it would strip power away from the Habsburg emperor that rules over that territory and who has given all these rights and privileges to people like Metternich, right? So I hope I explained that well. We'll talk about it more in class if you don't understand. If you still don't get what self-determination is, highlight it and we'll talk about it, okay? Now, he even managed to unite conservative enemies that had long time hated each other together just in the sense of keeping empires intact. Russians and Ottomans don't like each other. They have battled over the same land for hundreds of years, right? And Clemens von Metternich came along, and he actually convinced them to unite together to prevent the uproar of different people trying to liberate themselves from their empires, right? So that's how strong the conservative ties are, right? They're very, very strong, and these conservatives are terrified of what coming again? Revolutions, right? So looking down the highway, looking down the road, you can tell that conservative ideology is not going to last for as long as people think, right? And a lot of it is because their main goals are repressing things, right? Prevent constitutions from popping up. Prevent people from thinking they deserve their own countries. Don't allow them to have revolutions, right? So this is why the age of Metternich didn't have any war between France and Austria or any war between England and Russia for a long time. It's due to the fact that they're all too busy trying to prevent something from happening on the boundaries or inside the borders of their own country, right? That is what they want to do. They want to repress the revolution. So the thing about it is conservatives believe themselves to be fighting this thing known as the dual revolution, right? The dual revolution is an idea where the economic and political changes, which is Napoleon's toothpaste, the things that he created, the expansion of middle-class ideas, the creation of constitutions that actually spanned entire empires, the creation of basic rights, the creation of a middle-class agenda, and also parliamentarian bodies, those are Napoleon's toothpaste, right? And that dual revolution is the idea of economics with capitalism and all those political changes fused together, which reinforce the ideas of socialism and liberalism, right? The dual revolution is the ideological, let's go, thing that made liberals and socialists think they were right, okay? So think of this like a contagious idea. The dual revolution is the thing going around infecting middle-class members being like, you deserve a constitution, right? It's the thing going around infecting socialists being like, you deserve more rights for your labor, right? So like that's the dual revolution. And conservatives are literally fighting these ideas off, right? And so it's turning into like Team Liberal versus this thing called the Holy Alliance. Now it's very important to understand that there is an alliance within the alliance, right? There's the Quadruple Alliance, which is Great Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, right? So, but then there's the Holy Alliance, right? The Holy Alliance is the continental conservative alliance of Prussia, Russia, and Austria that want to suppress anything from going on and want to exact control over other people. Great Britain doesn't necessarily want to do this in the continent because they're making so much money off of repressing people of foreign-born like places like India, right? So Great Britain is not involved in trying to prevent constitutions from rising up and giving people liberal progressive bodies because they've had a constitution since 1215 with the Magna Carta. So you see what I'm talking about? Britain's not involved in this idea of stopping the growth of constitutions and preventing self-determination or stopping that growth of that conservative kryptonite, right? The big goal of this Holy Alliance is destroy any new constitution you can get your hands on, right? A big example is the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies in Spain, okay? So you understand, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies is in southern Italy, and you know where Spain is, right? Both of those places tried to create liberal-backed constitutional bodies that would create liberal monarchies and legislative assemblies. And the Holy Alliance recruited massive armies and then went over there and destroyed them. Like literally just invaded and prevented them from actually creating these ideas or these new governing bodies, right? We are moving so fast. Y'all are doing absolutely so great. Skip that. You don't need it. You don't need it. You don't need it. But this is very important, okay? So conservative things like Metternich's ideas were not ultimately reaching, okay? So Metternich could not prevent everything from happening. And all of his buddies in the Holy Alliance, yes, you prevented the Two Sicilies from uniting with a liberal body. Yes, you prevented Spain from creating a new constitutional monarchy. But you're not going to be able to stop everything, right? So Clemens von Metternich could not stop the Latin American independence movements, which are on the way, okay? So highlight Latin America. Highlight it. Circle it, because we're going to be talking about that next, okay? It's very important that you understand that. He also couldn't prevent Belgium from becoming its own country later on, etc., okay? So his reach is not ultimate. They're not going to be able to stop anything and everything, right? Because there is a virus inside of Europe growing right now. And that virus is known as nationalism, right? So nationalism is the idea that each group of people has its own genius, its own unity, its own thing that makes them special and awesome, right? So for example, Americans have a ton of nationalism connected to our history, connected to our culture, connected to our regional differences, connected to our food, connected to our sports. We have huge nationalism inside of our sports, right? That's nationalism because we believe we are Americans, so we like things like blah, 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 cheeseburgers, right? So nationalism, though, is growing in Europe as well, and it's growing along with self-determination, right? So self-determination, that idea that we deserve our own countries, and nationalism are going to fuse together to start creating movements where people want to rebel against empires like the Austrian Habsburg Empire that Metternich rules over, right? So during this period, led to the desire for independent states. Take self-determination and take nationalism and mush them together. And people are going to be like, you know what? Serbians deserve a country known as Serbia, right? So the idea is beginning to grow because there are too few states, right? And too many ethnic groups. This is also pushed by Napoleon's conquest of Europe, okay? There are no examples right here. That's dumb. I just forgot to put something in there. These movements didn't erupt until later in the 1800s, but it's important to know that the ideas of nationalism are beginning to grow, right? So I believe that's all the stuff in Europe. Yes! Okay, so now what we're going to be doing, okay, is you're going to be jumping over, all right, and you're going to be discussing what's going on over in. So now we're moving over to imperialism versus colonialism, and we're talking about the effects of Napoleon abroad, right? We talked about that together in class, and we decided that we were going to go in this direction rather than discussing this in a kind of weird, out of order situation, right? So, well, now what we're doing is we're going to be jumping back in time, and we're going to be talking about the effects of Napoleon and the French Revolution on an international scale. So this is a very large title and a separating section in your notes, because you remember when we started this section out and we said the effects of Napoleon in Europe and worldwide, right? So we're now getting into that worldwide section, okay? So you had all your stuff that's going on in Europe because of Napoleon up here. Now we're going to talk about all the stuff that's going on in Latin America because of Napoleon directly beneath it, right? So the effects of Napoleon are very, very important, because what Napoleon's going to cause in all of his invasions are going to force different maps to change, okay? So basically looking at this map, you see how we got all this green? Everything in green or a shade of green is owned by Spain. Everything in pink or a shade of red is owned by Great Britain. And everything in purple or blue or periwinkle or whatever the front door of this is owned by Portugal, okay? So you understand, the invasions of Napoleon are going to make the map go from looking like this to looking like this, okay? Where all these groups of people who live here now are going to claim themselves to be new, self-determined, different groups of people that deserve their own united countries away from European control, right? So the big thing you need to understand is, Mr. Terry, I have a question, all right? So, and as all honors kids typically do, a lot of kids always say, but what's the difference between imperialism and colonialism, right? So something that you need to understand is that this ism we have not talked about yet, but this one we have, okay? So do me a favor and write colonialism versus imperialism, right? So colonialism is the old way. So underneath colonialism, right, this is the old way. This is the idea of setting up physical colonies ran by Europeans in the pursuit of raw materials and money for their mother country, right? So when you're looking at this, this is like colonialism is like the 13 American colonies, right? That's what colonialism is, okay? I'm going to put up a really long definition of colonialism and imperialism right here. Do not write them down. It's not worth it, okay? So colonialism is the policy or practice of acquiring full physical control. We are sending people from our country over there to create towns and cities and then spread and take it over physically. Now, imperialism is very important, okay? Imperialism is the thing we're going to be talking about at the end of this chapter, right? In the 1800s. But I want to go ahead and get it out of the way now so that you understand that there's a massive difference between these two things. Because some people are going to say, well, what's the difference between imperialism and the colonies and all that stuff that we talked about in the past? Well, imperialism is the policy of not using physical colonies, but using your military or your economics to exploit another group of people from somewhere else. For example, it's what the British have been doing to India for hundreds of years, okay? So the British did not set up colonies in India because so many people lived there. Instead, they sent their military there to force Indian people to work and create natural resources, and so they could strip those natural resources and send them back to factories in England, right? So a lot of it has to do with who is going to take over things, right? So to give you another example, I actually have a very good clip of a doctor, a PhD of what I hope to one day be, actually also explaining the difference between colonialism and imperialism. And here is that clip.
Review. Speak. 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 Speak.
So thank you very much, Dr. Rufio, okay? Dr. Rufio is a very, very smart boy. He's a very cute boy, too. He's very squishy. And like he was basically examining, is that colonialism and imperialism only really truly differ on one giant thing. They're both about making money. They're both about stripping raw materials from other places. But colonialism involves setting up colonies, whereas imperialism makes other people, like military leaders, control people directly. You don't, like, live there. You don't stay there, okay? So that's really important that you understand. But also, leading into this whole thing, so new little section, okay? So the background to these crazy Latin American independence movements, because this Latin American independence movement is going to sound the death bell for colonialism, right? Colonialism is beginning to end. Colonialism is dying, right? So, because colonialism doesn't make as much sense anymore. It takes too many people, it takes too much stuff, and it's not as profitable anymore, right? Because now you got factories and stuff, and all you really want is the raw materials, and everyone's realizing that if a colony gets too big, it's going to liberate itself anyway, right? And so you're going to see that happen in real life. So the background of this, and yes, you need all this stuff, leading into the colonial rebellions of South America, Central America, as well as Saint-Domingue, which is Haiti, you have to understand that when the Spanish arrived in the 1500s, they came into contact with people like the Maya, the Aztec, the Inca, right? Very, very sophisticated, large-scale empires that just lacked domesticated animals and forgeable metals to be able to fight off the Spanish or fend them off and prevent their encroachment, right? So European colonization is going to kick up in the 1500s, okay? So Spain, Portugal, France are going to begin to colonize places in Latin America. We consider Latin America to be Mexico and southward, right? Basically inhabited by places, or Latin America is places colonized by Latin origin speaking language, right? France is a Latin origin language. Spanish is a Latin origin language. Portuguese is a Latin origin language. That's why we refer to them as Latin America, okay? So the timeline of looking at this thing is also very simple and very important. Honestly, this is the most important thing on this slide, because if you look at this thing collectively, the English Revolution, English Civil War, glorious revolution, is going to lead to the Enlightenment, right? The Enlightenment is going to inspire the American Revolution. The American Revolution is going to inspire the French Revolution. The French Revolution is then going to inspire Latin American independence movements, okay, and self-determination in Europe, okay? So these two revolutions, coupled with the things that came before them, led Latin Americans to thinking that they deserved countries of their own. Venezuelans deserve to be Venezuela, right? Ecuadorians deserve to be Ecuadorian. Argentinians deserve to be Argentinian, just like Americans believe they deserve to be Americans, right? We believe as an American country that our American Revolution is so unique and so singular, but these have happened all over the place, right? These Latin American independence movements followed the model of the American one and liberated themselves as well, right? And you know what self-determination is. We just talked about that, so we can skip that, okay? So the first one to revolutionize, which is very, very important, is going to happen during the French Revolution. So we are now currently traveling back in time, going all the way back to when the French Revolution was going on, okay? So we talked about the effects of the French Revolution and Napoleon in Europe and how that's going to lead to the Congress of Vienna and all the political isms popping up, but we're now traveling back in time, right? And we're even before the French Revolution. We're talking about the early 1700s, okay? And there's a very, very important colony we need to discuss, okay? And that colony is known as Saint-Domingue, right? Saint-Domingue is the colony that you now refer to as Haiti, okay? So really, really quick, stop writing, okay? Something you need to understand is the place you now know as modern-day Haiti was originally known as Saint-Domingue. It was a French colony. It's why people that live there speak French. It's also why people that live, it's why people that live there speak French. It's why they have French names. For example, Pierre Garçon was an actual NFL wide receiver that played for the Indianapolis Colts and also the Washington, never mind, I'm not going to say the name. They played for the Washington as well, and he is French, and he is from Haiti, okay? So he's not French, but he speaks French, and he's from Haiti. Now, on the other side of the island is a Spanish-speaking colony that you refer to now as the modern-day Dominican Republic, okay? And it was originally known as Santo Domingo, right? So, but look, this one island has a name, okay? And the island that Haiti and the DR share is called Hispaniola, all right? And that's spelled Hispanola. Hispaniola, okay? So it's important that you know that, because if you don't, you won't understand anything that's going on, okay? So Saint-Domingue is going to be the very first place to liberate itself from European control. And the amazing thing about Saint-Domingue is it is a colony that was inhabited by a majority of African descendant people. 90% of the people that lived in Saint-Domingue leading up to their liberation movement were black, okay? And the big thing you have to understand is these people are going to liberate themselves from European control in a massive conquest over their oppressors, right? It is an amazing story that we have to talk about. We are going to give credit to because it is very, very rare that people learn about this movement. And I think it's very, very important to be able to discuss how a slave colony is going to liberate itself from European control, right? And just so you understand, leading up to the French Revolution, Saint-Domingue was mostly a plantation economy, right? 1 out of every 3 persons, or like in the entire triangle trade, that was being traded over that middle passage leg coming from Africa to the colonies carrying slaves, 1 out of every 3 of those people stepped foot in Saint-Domingue at least one time in their life. So it was a major slave trade hub, right? And 6 out of every people, so for every 1 person that was free inside of Saint-Domingue, there were 6 people that were actually slaves, right? So most of the colony is dominated by enslaved people, right? And they are there to produce 2 things for the French that make them a ridiculous amount of money. 40% of the world's sugar came from Saint-Domingue. 60% of its coffee came from Saint-Domingue. It's the one colony that the French were allowed to keep after the French and Indian War, right? Now, the big thing about it, though, is Saint-Domingue is going to also have a history of slave upheaval. Obviously, right? So, because these people are being oppressed, they are being, violently destroyed all the time, and they are being forced to, work on in an agricultural space against their will, right? So even before the French Revolution, slaves from Saint-Domingue began to run away at high rates. They were dying in revolts, right? And they were actually trying to lead revolts against their white oppressors, right? The European oppressors, the French oppressors, right? The big thing about it, though, you also need to understand, is that they're doing this, and the problem is they have nowhere to go, right? So as the slave revolts are happening, where are they going to go, okay? They can't go to Cuba because that's owned by Spain, and they're just going to return them back to the island. They can't go to Santo Domingo, which is on the other half of the island, which is owned by Spain. They're just going to return them back anyway. So they began to establish runaway communities called Maroons, right? And Maroons were these spaces or these little alcoves and places that were actually inside the mountains of Saint-Domingue or on the beaches, right? And they established these small slave towns, right? Or slave revolt towns, right? So, and these Maroons were completely self-dependent, did not use money, and were agriculturally self-dependent on each other, right? So these Maroons, on the other hand, were hurting the French economy. So the French decide they have to figure out a way to force these Maroon people to go back to being enslaved, right? Which is one of the most screwed up things in history. And we will talk about how they accomplished that in class tomorrow. I will see y'all then. Y'all have a good one.